important aspect of scrutinising public investment in these entities. Kia ora koutou.
Madam Chair.
I call the Honourable Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't taken a call for a while, so it's nice to be back in the House and in this annual review debate. And I want to acknowledge Miette Wooler-Harris, who's a Year 13 student at Rutherford College in my electorate, and Miette is interning in Parliament this week and is in the gallery for this debate. I want to talk about housing, Madam Chair, and it's appropriate that housing is grouped together with social development, because the housing crisis that the former National Government allowed to spin out of control so badly when the Honourable Dr Nick Smith was the Housing Minister is responsible for most, if not all, of the poverty and inequality that we've seen over the last decade in New Zealand. The housing crisis has exacted a terrible price on the people of this country, and this government inherited a shortfall of 71,000 houses that built up entirely on the former National Government's watch, including during the period that we're debating. 71,000 houses short across New Zealand, 45,000 in Auckland alone. Home ownership has fallen to a 66-year low. Home ownership hasn't been lower in 66 years. And what did the former National Government do about it during its time in office? They made an art form. They made an art form of tinkering, of minimalist incrementalism, and making excuses for doing nothing. And that minister, former minister across the House, Nick Smith, he was the arch practitioner of this whole policy of doing as little as possible while the housing market was allowed to burn. What did they do with state housing? The institution, Housing New Zealand, that has been there for decade after decade as an expression of New Zealanders' compassion and belief that every child growing up in this country should have a decent roof over their heads, no matter how life might be a struggle for mum and dad, and for people who would otherwise really struggle to get a decent roof.
Again, could he relate it back to the appropriations? Relate it back.
Madam Chair, I'm going to talk about the appropriations, because I'm talking about state housing. Yeah. State housing that was sold off during the period of this annual review by the former National Government. In the middle of the worst housing crisis in living memory, what did they do? They sold off state housing. They're so desperate to wash their hands of the fundamental responsibility to put a decent roof over the heads of people who need it. And when we came into government, we asked the officials what's going on with the State House sell-off. 2,500 houses in Christchurch, including the State House that John Key lived in as a child, were in the process of being hocked off. They had been doing trade shows in Australia, to try and sell off the state housing. Another 700 houses in Invercargill that they were selling off. And it was really only the utter embarrassment of 2 winters of record homelessness that embarrassed them into any kind of action at all. I want to mention the other real casualty of the housing crisis, and that is the 40,000-odd kids who every year get bundled off to hospital with respiratory and infectious diseases. The 1,600 mostly older New Zealanders who die premature deaths every winter in this country because the state of the housing that they're living in is so poor. The best, after 9 years in office, and during the period that we're debating in this annual review, the very best that Dr Nick Smith could summon up was to require smoke alarms, and a very, very weak, inadequate insulation standard. And it's been left to this government to come in and take some serious measures to actually require not just a smoke alarm and a very inadequate insulation standard. Madam Chair.
I call the Honourable Phil Twyford.
To require not only an inadequate insulation standard and smoke alarms, which in themselves might be okay, but in the circumstances woefully short of what's needed, but a serious modern set of standards that would require landlords to ensure that rental properties are warm and dry. Why shouldn't they be required to do that? It's a scandal that 500,000 Kiwis are living in rental properties that are some of which are in an appalling condition and are a risk to their health. So our Healthy Homes Guarantee will require that rental properties are dry, are heatable, address drainage, address draft stopping, address moisture control. None of the things that the legislation passed during this annual review period under the sponsorship of Nick Smith address. So our Healthy Homes Guarantee will finish the job that was started under that government but left incompleted. So there are, I think, 4 key factors underlying the housing crisis, 4 drivers of the housing crisis that are responsible for the misery that we saw year after year after year under the former National Government. And they are, Madam Chair, I believe, infrastructure financing, the biggest roadblock to the ability of our towns and cities to grow up and out. The planning system, a highly restrictive planning system that chokes off the supply of available land, drives land prices up, triggers speculation and land banking, and is one of the main factors that's responsible for the absurdly expensive urban land prices that we have. A low productivity construction industry that has very high build costs, very low productivity, and is rife with anti-competitive practices. And fourth, tax settings that encourage an economy of land banking and property speculation. Those are the 4 big drivers of the problem we have. In 9 years, including in the period that we're debating in this annual review, the former National Government did next to nothing about each of those 4 factors. Next to nothing. And that, Madam Chair, I believe, is an absolute scandal. I want to talk in relation to those problems that I've raised, about what this coalition government, led by Labour, supported in coalition by New Zealand First, and in Confidence and Supply by the Greens. I want to talk about what we've done in 6 months. In 6 months, Madam Chair. We stopped the State House sell-off, one of the first things we did, and we've commenced on a massive State House building program. We've set up a Kiwi Build unit. You mark my words, Dr. Smith, you're going to see a lot more Kiwi Build houses coming down the track. You just mark my words. A Kiwi Build unit in MB that is overseeing the development of large, complex urban development projects and a mass government procurement program to build affordable homes for first-home buyers. 155 new state houses in the regions, the biggest and only significant building program of state housing in the regions in more than 2 decades. That former National Government sold off houses, state houses in the regions. They did not build any, they sold them off, and regional New Zealand won't forget that. We are in the process of banning foreign buyers so that only permanent residents and citizens of New Zealand can buy the existing housing stock. We want foreign investment in the building of new homes and in new developments, but we will not allow offshore speculators to bid up the price of the existing housing stock. Madam Chair, we have work underway on reforming infrastructure financing and freeing up the planning system. We will reform the RMA, but not in the tinkering way that Nick Smith did, that made the RMA more complex, more expensive and more burdensome.
Can I just ask the Minister, please, in the last 30-odd seconds, could he actually talk about the appropriations, the period 16-17?
Madam Chair, it's perfectly admissible within an annual review debate to talk about the period right up to the present. Members on that side of the House have been doing it, and I'm doing it right now.
Relate that to the appropriations, This is not a policy discussion.
The first KiwiBuild homes at McLennan were unveiled the other day, 18 of them, and they will benefit from a $2 billion appropriation that will kickstart the KiwiBuild program. There are going to be many more coming. We are rolling out the emergency housing around the country that former government never did, and we are undertaking...
I call
Thank you.
Honourable Nick Smith.
Madam Chair, I'm not at all surprised that the Minister coughed in